Most people think great scientists change the world by discovering new facts. They imagine someone uncovering a hidden rule, writing it down, and suddenly everything is different. A new law, a new formula, a new piece of information added to the pile. But what if the biggest shift doesn't come from adding something new? What if it comes from looking at what was already there differently? That is what happened. Feynman didn't change physics. The planets were already moving the way they moved. Light was already behaving the way it behaved. Atoms were already dancing in their strange, invisible ways. He didn't rewrite the universe. He changed how we see it. And that is much more powerful. Let me ask you something simple. Have you ever looked at one of those optical illusions? At first you see one image, maybe an old woman. Then suddenly someone points out that it's also a young woman. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The lines didn't change. The picture didn't change. Your perception changed. And once perception changes, reality feels different. Physics went through something like that. Before, it often felt like a collection of serious rules carved in stone, heavy, distant, cold. Students memorized them the way they memorize dates in history. Useful perhaps, impressive maybe, but not alive. Then came a different voice. A playful voice. A curious voice. A voice that wasn't afraid to say, "I don't know." That voice asked questions in a way that felt almost childlike. Why does it do that? What is actually happening here? If I look at it this way, does it still make sense? That tone matters. Because the tone of a question determines the depth of its answer. If you ask a question just to confirm what you already believe, you will never see anything new. But if you ask because you are genuinely puzzled, genuinely open, then reality has room to surprise you. And surprise is where understanding begins. Feynman approached physics not as a sacred temple but as a playground. Not a place of rigid authority, but of exploration. That doesn't mean he wasn't serious. He was deeply serious. But he was serious about truth, not about status. He once said that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Think about that. The biggest obstacle to understanding is not the complexity of the universe. It is the comfort of our own assumptions. We love explanations that feel smooth. We love answers that close the case. We love certainty. But the universe is under no obligation to satisfy our love of certainty. It behaves the way it behaves. And if our explanation doesn't match what happens, the explanation loses. That attitude alone changes how you see reality. Instead of asking, "What is the correct answer?" you begin asking, "What does nature actually do?" That shift is subtle. But it is revolutionary. Imagine trying to understand a river. You could write down rules about water flow. You could memorize patterns of currents. But if you never stand by the river and watch it, really watch it, you miss something essential. The river is not a rule. It is motion. It is interaction. It is water responding to rocks, to gravity, to itself. Reality is like that river. Before, physics often felt like a list of rules about the river. After the shift, it became the study of the motion itself. Look carefully. Observe honestly. Let the behavior teach you. That approach dissolves fear. So many people are intimidated by physics because it feels like a fortress of knowledge guarded by equations. But when you treat it as careful observation of patterns, it becomes approachable. You drop something, it falls. You shine light, it reflects, bends, spreads. You heat water, it moves faster. These are not abstract ideas. They are behaviors you can witness. The question is not, can I memorize this? The question is, can I notice the pattern? And once you start noticing patterns, something magical happens. The world feels connected. Instead of separate laws for separate phenomena, you see relationships. You see that motion, heat, light, matter are not isolated topics. They are different expressions of interaction. Reality becomes less like a filing cabinet and more like a web. Everything touching everything else. That web-like vision changes how you think beyond science. Because suddenly you realize that nothing truly stands alone. An object is not just an object, it is how it interacts. A person is not just a fixed identity. They are how they respond to others. A system is not defined by its parts alone, but by how the parts influence each other. Once you see that, reality feels dynamic instead of static. And dynamic reality requires flexible thinking. Here is something deeply important. The deeper we look into the universe, the stranger it appears. Tiny particles don't behave like tiny solid balls. Space is not an empty stage, it has structure. Time is not as simple as a ticking clock. If you cling too tightly to everyday intuition, you resist these discoveries. You say, that can't be right. That's not how things work. But what if the problem is not with the universe, but with your expectation? Feynman was fearless about this. If reality behaved in a way that contradicted common sense, he didn't try to force it back into common sense. He allowed his common sense to expand. That is rare. Most people protect their beliefs. He tested his, and that makes all the difference. Because when you protect a belief, you stop learning. When you test it, you refine it. Reality is not offended by being questioned. It responds to questioning. But it only responds honestly if you are willing to accept the answer. Even if the answer is strange. Even if the answer disrupts what you thought you knew. This is where science becomes philosophical. If everything we know is provisional, if every explanation is our best current model rather than a final truth, then certainty becomes a temporary comfort. That doesn't make knowledge weak, it makes it alive. Living things evolve. Ideas should too. Imagine a map. A map is not the territory, it is a representation. If you treat the map as sacred, you will refuse to update it when the landscape changes. But if you treat it as a tool, you improve it over time. Physics is a map. Reality is the territory. Feynman kept reminding people not to confuse the two. The equations, the diagrams, the words, they are tools. Useful, powerful tools. But they are not the universe itself. And when you remember that, you become less rigid. You stop defending the map. You start exploring the territory. There is a deep humility in that. And humility is not weakness. It is clarity about your limits. We are small creatures on a small planet orbiting an average star in a vast cosmos. Yet we can understand pieces of it. That is astonishing. But our understanding is always partial. And that is okay. In fact, that is beautiful. Because it means there is always more to discover. If physics had been finished, if every question had a final answer, curiosity would die. Wonder would fade. Instead, the more we learn, the more questions appear. It is like climbing a mountain. You reach one peak and see 100 more beyond it. You could feel discouraged. Or you could feel thrilled. Feynman felt thrilled. He delighted in not knowing. He found joy in the mystery itself. That joy is contagious. When you watch someone genuinely curious, you feel permission to be curious too. And that permission changes how you see reality. Instead of treating it as a machine to be mastered, you treat it as a story unfolding. You listen more carefully. You assume less. You become comfortable saying, I don't understand this yet. That word yet is powerful. It transforms ignorance from a permanent label into a temporary state. I don't understand this yet. That sentence keeps the door open, and keeping the door open is essential. Because reality does not reveal itself all at once. It reveals itself layer by layer to those who look patiently. If you stare at the night sky, at first you see scattered stars. But the longer you look, the more structure appears. Clusters. Patterns, depth. The sky did not change. Your attention deepened. And attention is the true instrument of science. Not intelligence alone. Not memory alone. Attention. Careful observation. Honest reflection. The willingness to revise. These qualities change how you see everything. They change how you see success and failure. An experiment that fails is not a disaster. It is feedback. Nature telling you your expectation was slightly off. An idea that collapses is not humiliation. It is refinement. If you take it personally, you stop exploring. If you take it as information, you grow. And that mindset reaches far beyond laboratories. In conversations, instead of defending your first opinion, you might ask, what am I missing? In challenges, instead of declaring defeat, you might ask, what pattern am I not seeing yet? This is not about being uncertain all the time. It is about being open enough to adjust. Flexible thinking is strong thinking. Rigid thinking feels strong, but it breaks under pressure. Reality is subtle. It rarely fits perfectly into our first interpretation. So when Feynman didn't change physics but changed how we see reality, what he really changed was our posture. From arrogance to curiosity. From certainty to exploration. From memorization to understanding. He showed that the universe is not a list of facts. It is behavior unfolding, it is interaction. It is patterns dancing across scales. And we are part of that dance. You are not outside reality looking in. You are reality looking at itself. The atoms in your brain are made of the same processes you are trying to understand. The universe has arranged itself in such a way that it can ask questions about itself. That is extraordinary. When you realize that physics stops being distant. It becomes intimate. It becomes personal. Not because it revolves around you, but because you are woven into it. And that realization carries responsibility. If you are part of the unfolding, then your thinking matters. Your curiosity matters. Your honesty matters. Every time you choose to look more carefully instead of assuming, you align yourself with the deeper rhythm of reality. A rhythm of interaction. A rhythm of adjustment. A rhythm of endless refinement. So maybe the greatest change was not in the equations written on chalkboards. Maybe it was in the invitation extended to everyone. An invitation to think, to question, to doubt without fear, to explore without ego. Because once you adopt that way of seeing, physics is no longer intimidating. Reality is no longer fixed. And learning is no longer a burden, it becomes an adventure. An ongoing conversation. A journey with no final page. And perhaps that is the most powerful shift of all. The realization that understanding is not about reaching the end. It is about learning how to travel. So I leave you with this. The next time you encounter something complex, in science, in life, in yourself, resist the urge to demand a quick answer. Pause, observe, ask what is actually happening. Be willing to let your first assumption dissolve. Because when you stop trying to force reality into your expectations, and start letting your expectations evolve to meet reality, that is when the world changes. Not because the universe shifted, but because you did. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can change is the way you see. And when you truly allow that shift to settle in, when you genuinely accept that the most powerful change is in how you see, something very quiet but very profound begins to happen inside you. You stop fighting reality. Most of us don't even realize we are fighting it. But we are. We fight uncertainty. We fight confusion. We fight outcomes we didn't expect. We cling to the comfort of what we already believe. But reality doesn't negotiate with our comfort. It unfolds. The question is not whether reality will behave in a way that surprises you. It will. The question is how you respond when it does. Do you tighten your grip on your old assumptions? Or do you loosen it? This was the deeper shift. Not new facts, not new equations. A new attitude toward being wrong. Think about how powerful that is. Being wrong is uncomfortable. It pokes at the ego. It threatens identity. But if you treat being wrong as a step toward clarity instead of a wound to your pride, everything changes. Imagine assembling a puzzle in a dimly lit room. You place pieces together based on guesswork. Some fit, some don't. If a piece doesn't fit, you don't accuse the puzzle of betrayal. You adjust. You try another combination. Reality is that puzzle. And the light in the room is your attention. The brighter your attention, the clearer the image becomes. But attention requires patience. It requires slowing down. It requires resisting the temptation to declare victory too soon. One of the most radical things about Feynman's way of thinking was how comfortable he was with mystery. He didn't rush to close the case. He didn't try to smooth over strangeness just to make it feel tidy. He allowed the mystery to remain visible. That is rare. Most people want explanations that remove mystery. He wanted explanations that respected it. There is a difference. You can explain something in a way that makes it seem dull and finished. Or you can explain something in a way that reveals how astonishing it truly is. Take light, for example. You flip a switch and a room brightens. Ordinary. Everyday. But when you look carefully, light is one of the strangest behaviors in the universe. It doesn't behave exactly like a particle. It doesn't behave exactly like a wave. It follows patterns that challenge common sense. Instead of forcing light into familiar categories, he accepted that our categories might be too small. That is a powerful lesson. When something doesn't fit your mental box, maybe the problem isn't the thing. Maybe the box is too narrow. And this applies everywhere. When a person doesn't behave the way you expect, maybe your expectations are too rigid. When a problem doesn't yield to your first solution, maybe your perspective needs widening. When reality surprises you, maybe it's inviting you to expand. Expansion is uncomfortable, but it is growth, and growth is the natural rhythm of understanding. The more deeply physics explored matter, energy, space, and time, the more it revealed that our everyday experience is only a thin slice of what is possible. At small scales, certainty fades into probabilities. At vast scales, time stretches and bends in ways that challenge intuition. If you demand that the universe conform to common sense, you will constantly be disappointed. But if you allow common sense to evolve, you begin to appreciate the deeper consistency beneath the strangeness. Consistency is important. The universe is not random chaos. It is structured. It follows patterns. But those patterns are sometimes subtler than our first impressions. It's like music written in a key you've never heard before. At first it sounds unfamiliar, even dissonant. But as you listen more carefully, you begin to hear harmony within it. The harmony was always there. Your ear needed time to adjust. Physics did not become simpler. Our ears became more refined, and that refinement required humility. Humility is the quiet recognition that your current understanding is not final. It is temporary. It is a working draft. That idea alone can transform your relationship with knowledge. Instead of defending your current draft as sacred, you treat it as improvable. You become less afraid of new information, less threatened by alternative perspectives, more curious about what you might be missing. Curiosity is not weakness. It is strength without arrogance. And when curiosity drives your thinking, you become flexible in a way that rigid certainty can never achieve. Flexible thinking adapts. Rigid thinking yours. Now here is something deeply beautiful. When you look at the universe through this lens, as patterns unfolding, as interactions shaping outcomes, you start to see that everything is connected by behavior. The same principles that describe the motion of planets describe the motion of falling apples. The same patterns that describe tiny particles describe stars. Scale changes. The underlying logic remains. That unity is breathtaking. It suggests that reality is not a patchwork of unrelated rules. It is a coherent story told across different levels. And we are reading that story one page at a time. But we must be careful readers. If you rush through a novel, you miss nuance. You miss foreshadowing. You miss subtle connections between early and later chapters. The universe is subtle. It whispers through patterns. It reveals itself through consistency. And if you are patient enough, attentive enough, you begin to notice that what once felt disconnected begins to align. The click happens gradually. It is not fireworks. It is recognition. It is the moment when confusion reorganizes into clarity. And that moment does not happen because the universe changed. It happens because your perception matured. This is the most empowering realization of all. Understanding is not reserved for a select few. It is available to anyone willing to observe honestly, question bravely, and revise humbly. You do not need to be fearless. You need to be honest. Honest about what you know. Honest about what you don't. Honest about when evidence challenges you. That honesty creates intellectual freedom. Freedom from pretending. Freedom from defending. Freedom to explore. And exploration is joyful. There is joy in discovering that your previous assumption was incomplete. Not because you were foolish, but because you have grown. There is joy in seeing deeper layers of reality reveal themselves. There is joy in realizing that mystery is not an obstacle but an invitation. Perhaps that is the greatest shift of all. Seeing mystery not as something to eliminate, but as something to engage with. Mystery keeps curiosity alive. Certainty can suffocate it. If you believe you already know everything essential, why look further? But if you accept that your knowledge is provisional, every day becomes an opportunity. The sky above you is not just blue. It is light scattering in a particular way. The warmth on your skin is not just comfort. It is energy transferred across space. The solidity of the ground beneath you is not absolute. It is interaction at scales too small to see. Every ordinary moment hides extraordinary behavior. And when you see that, the world becomes richer. Not because it changed. Because you did. So the deeper message is not about physics alone. It is about perception. It is about how you stand in relation to the unknown. Do you treat it as an enemy to conquer? Or as a partner in discovery? When Feynman didn't change physics but changed how we see reality, he shifted the relationship between the thinker and the world. From dominance to dialogue. From authority to curiosity. From final answers to evolving understanding. And once that relationship shifts, everything feels different. The universe is no longer a cold machine ticking away indifferently. It is a dynamic system revealing itself to careful observers. You are one of those observers, not separate from it. Part of it. A temporary arrangement of matter capable of reflection. That is astonishing. The same processes that forged ours forged you. And now, through you, those processes are asking questions. What could be more beautiful than that? So perhaps the true revolution was not scientific at all. It was perceptual. It was the realization that the way we look determines what we see. And when we look with humility, patience, and curiosity, reality responds with depth. The world does not become simpler, it becomes clearer. And clarity, unlike certainty, does not close doors, it opens them. So the next time you encounter something that feels confusing, resist the urge to label it impossible. Instead, ask yourself gently, What am I not seeing yet? Because that question, asked sincerely, has changed the course of science. And it can change the course of your own thinking. Not by altering the universe, but by transforming the way you see it.